then in 2021, the Open Science recommendation is extending on this vision. From the same perspective, right? The equitable and accessible science. We have, as Gustavo mentioned this morning, also developed the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, and now working, hopefully will be ready this year, the recommendation of the ethics of neurotechnologies at technologies that have big impact in society, and that we need to protect also people from their misuse and their rights. So in this context, this final policy brief will be about how to transition to open science at the institutional level, building on the learnings from these 5 case studies at Opus. It is a long-term process, as we mentioned. Achieving the cultural setting is not easy. It has a lot of implications at the cultural, structural, and policy-related challenges. That are the ones that we will be focusing on in the brief. So basically, we identify the key barriers and challenges that the institutional open science plans had addressed. We are extracting lessons and best practices from Opus that could be, as James asked before, inspiring other institutions or countries, and then provide some policy recommendations to these 3 levels that Rinske was talking this morning: the local, institutional, national, and European, even global, because of the perspective of UNESCO. Some key findings, pending some contributions, as I say, that the institutional change is hindered by fragmented policies and teams, resource constraints, and resistance to change that already our pilots were mentioning. The effective open science implementation depends a lot on a strong and long-term leadership, clear initiatives, and sustained capacity building, which is also a challenge. And that policy interventions are essential to sustain these actions from the institutional side, with incentives, resources, and coherent adoption at these 3 levels that I mentioned. There are main barriers that are, among others, fragmented policies. So we had pilots that were doing a lot of work, but then the national level or the policies on open science are not that developed, or pilots that are not don't have the mandate to go beyond what they are ordered by their ministries. The misdevelopment of national policies and incentives and infrastructure, also talking about national repositories and other. There is, of course, and this is linked to the 2017 recommendation of UNESCO, the high mobility and low retention of researchers, let's say precarity issues. That is also a barrier to open science as a long-term commitment. Early career researchers and women in particular are suffering from this low retention. There is low recognition in some institutions and member states of the open science in career progression. So it is an added non-paid work that is hindering also the progression of researchers, that an overload of work. There are resource constraints, resistance to change, and some of them are conscious, some are unconscious. So it's a lot of work on this part, and inconsistent technical and social science and humanities capacity to really engage with societal actors outside of academia. So some very good practices and lessons from Opus, that we did these participatory and inclusive processes since the beginning. So researchers were really involved in the beginning. The seek for diversity, sometimes we didn't get that much, but it was also a good lesson to mix different career stages, different personal backgrounds from genders, sex orientation, language, origins, cultures, and underrepresented groups in particular, and roles. So not only researchers, but also the hierarchy, the research managers, librarians, HRM, because they were hiring and they will hire people, or on the promotion. So to get them involved in the design and the practice of the of the policies and the capacity building. To have a strong leadership and institutional commitment is key for the advancement of open science and institutions. So visibility to the top managers, allocate resources and staff, also time for the cohort that is participating, that is rewarded, and that they can have less work on less workload in other tasks. And as the University of Cyprus also mentioned, the open science ambassadors and champions are also a very good practice. On the part of the policies, again, this when the national frameworks are lacking, like in the case of Lisbon, then having an interim, even interim or open science policy gives this long-term and commitment of the researchers to enter in this kind of activities. The exchange with other countries is also a motivation and is rewarding for the people integrating the cohort. The integration in the research assessment framework of all this, of course, capacity building and training, centralized infrastructure, community engagement is also important, it's a key part, and sometimes it's not there. We talk sometimes about citizen science, but community engagement is a more ambitious thing, and normally we don't have time or skills or resources to go there. On the challenges and barriers, of course, we mentioned already the project duration is 3 years, and the partial understanding of open science. So it's normally open access plus maybe citizen science or plus maybe some valorization activities, which is not the holistic and bigger understanding of open science, at least from the UNESCO recommendation, hinder these more ambitious plans, but it's also linked to the temporary and the funding. The fragmenting policy landscape and leadership, so there is a lack of coherence, as I said, coherence between policies and national and institutional. So even if the institution has a big willing to go on that, it's hard to sustain and find the support. The mandate, and then yes, this is also the risk that the researchers might lose the interest, and then we might lose also the momentum. Of course, resource constraints, it was already mentioned. Cultural and structural resistance, already mentioned by the pilot. So there is a traditional assessment criteria and a status quo. There is a reluctance to change. There are some biases that are conscious, other are unconscious. Like many people think that open access is less excellent than the journals, the high journals as usual, so that the science there is less excellent. So all this is repeating. We have been working before in RRI projects. Is in gender equality, these are mind-setting process that take a lot of time, and there are many biases that are even unconscious. Then the technical and capacity gaps. We talked already, Annalena, about the data management plan, the fair data, how to have technical experts also to assess it, and the precarity. I think this was one of the topics that we have in Opus in the beginning, together with gender equality, trust in science, and industry, among others. And again, the job insecurity, short contracts, mobility requirements, especially in earlier career researchers that are the ones more willing and open to this kind of transition in science paradigms, are disrupting the engagement and the continuity. Equity and inclusion, so there are disparities in access to resource and support. There is no gender disaggregation, even in our RAF data indicators, so I will talk about that later, because there is no gender speech in the agenda from our experts in Vilnius, so I will very briefly say something. Again, for us and also from a UNESCO perspective, the precarity is a big issue, not only for open science, but for RI and for gender equality and for any kind of sustained science transition. Women are concerned in particular as well as caregivers. So they have more work, more mental charge. So it's harder to go into open science or other kinds of new things that require skills, capacity building, time and effort, motivation. There are a high turnover rate. The institutional memory and the cultural shifts towards open science. The COARA, the open science grants require some policies are there, let's say, in a theoretical part, but then on the ground we see that the hiring and the promotion and assessment practices are not aligned with that. So there is a lot of uncertainty in early career researchers that at the end need to prioritize their traditional practice in order to get promotion or the next grant or the next contract. There are a lot of unpaid work together with the proposal writing, outreach, supervision, academic services, all these aspects that are not really integrated into the research assessment framework. That is also a good output of OPUS to try to integrate other ways of doing science. And of course, there is this gender bias environment that is also impeding the open science biases. So we see in the literature some kind of report between environments that are more open to gender, they are also more open to open science, and the others, the other way is also true. We don't need to forget that 1 in 2 female scientists have reported sexual harassment at work, according to the UNESCO report on safety of researchers. There is no enough research, there is no enough data. We are not talking about gender plus, LGBTQ plus, and other things that should also be integrated. And there is need to do more research on how the gender is doing with open science and with science in general. So yeah, we did 2 workshops on gender within the OPUS projects and partners. The last one in May. At the end, there was a survey with 134 people. I don't have time, and the colleagues can share later the results from the University of Vilnius that are the ones leading this part. But still there is a risk that this gender washing can happen in the openness washing, let's say. So it will be good to align both gender and open science as new ways of more responsible and open science practices. The lack of intersectorial data and awareness of gender experience in open science practices, there is almost no real literature or research, means that many gender-based challenges remain invisible and therefore unaddressed. So some general enablers. So let's say about the structural problem of precarity and inequality that is already in the UNESCO recommendation on science and scientific research in the Article 33. All member states, so including the Europeans, should ensure adequate and equitable social security arrangements appropriate to their age, sex, family situation, state of health, and the nature of the work they perform. And this has to be integrated in the performance appraisals. So that has to be gender sensitive according to Article 34. In the recommendation on open science, we have in Article 17 also this mainstreaming gender equality into open science strategies and practices. So that's something that we need to work further. and yeah, have some gender and diversity measures together aligning, so integrate open science and gender equality engagement into the career assessment and progression, provide contract extensions, targeted internal funding for early career researchers and caregivers, or provide support, home league, telework, working core hours, kindergartens, all these conciliation measures that will be good for women, but not only, but for the whole research community, to promote more diversity in the open science teams and the research assessment teams also, to understand these ideas. And at the end, yes, this needs to be translated into the reform of the assessment frameworks and policies, so that we have more inclusive, flexible, also indicators and policies. So some concrete lessons to transform the barriers that we see in OPUS into policy action. So as very evident, develop and align the policies on the 3 levels, secure resources, embed open science in assessment, which we tried also at OPUS, the capacity and awareness, and engagement and inclusivity. Centralize and support infrastructure, support the early career researchers, and support the diversity and gender equality. So you have some practical tools there or ideas. And at the end, the conclusion is that we need to advance all together, that we cannot, and that was maybe one of the problems of RRI, all these 5 aspects, and some institutions were choosing 2 or 3 a la carte, and then there is not a real transformation of the science practices. So it will be good to do all together and use also the open science movement to do real openness also inside the researchers community, to gender, to less represented groups. Also, this will enable more trust in science, because we trust more people that relate to us, so that they seem, if we have more diversity, we have more public that will be engaged in principle, and the national and the local policies to support all this nice work from the pilots that we've seen. So there are some calls for actions in this sense. There is an open call for action of UNESCO on closing the gender gap in science. We had a joint session yesterday with the colleagues at UNESCO on the monitoring of open science, so as to feed the national monitoring system with the institutional and individual indicators, and how we can also work on this alignment. And of course, you can always participate in the open science working groups. There are ones in financing and incentives, policies and strategy monitoring frameworks, capacity building or infrastructure. And there is also working groups now open on the ethics of neurotechnology. And thank you very much for your attention.